What can a single photograph tell us about history? Often not even half the story. Tonight we're looking at 6 famous images and the history the camera couldn't capture. A wide avenue in Beijing, a column of tanks moving slowly forward, and in the middle of the road a single man carrying 2 shopping bags. For a few seconds everything stopped. The lead tank slowed and tried to move around him, but the man stepped sideways and blocked its path again. Standing directly in front of the armored vehicle, he refused to move as if the machines behind it didn't exist. It was the kind of moment that should last only seconds. Instead, it lasted long enough for cameras watching from nearby buildings to capture it forever. But the photograph shows only the confrontation. It does not show the night that came before. In the weeks leading up to June 1989, student protests had spread through Beijing. Demonstrators gathered in Tiananmen Square calling for political reform, and the crowds grew larger with each passing day. Then, during the night of June 3rd, the Chinese military moved into the city. Troops and armored vehicles advanced through the streets to clear the protests. Gunfire was reported across parts of Beijing as soldiers pushed toward Tiananmen Square. By morning, the demonstrations had been crushed. The following day, June 5th, tanks began moving again through the city. That was when a lone man stepped into the road. Several foreign journalists were still staying in hotels overlooking Chang'an Avenue that morning. Among them was Associated Press photographer Jeff Widener, who had been injured the night before while covering the unrest. From a balcony above the street, he raised his camera as the tanks approached. At first, the scene looked ordinary, a military convoy moving through the city. Then the lone figure appeared and walked directly into its path. Widener began shooting as the confrontation unfolded below. The man stood his ground as the tanks attempted to maneuver around him. At one point, he even climbed onto the lead vehicle, leaning toward the hatch as if speaking to the soldiers inside. No one could hear what was said. After several minutes, 2 figures ran into the street and pulled him away. The tanks continued forward, and the man disappeared into the crowd. The photographs quickly spread around the world. Within days, the image became one of the most recognizable photographs of the 20th century, a symbol of a single civilian standing in front of military power. Yet the most basic question about the moment has never been answered. Who was he? No confirmed identity was ever established. Reports and rumors appeared over the years, but none could be verified. The man at the center of the image simply vanished from the story. But not every photograph captures defiance. Some freeze the most tragic seconds imaginable. A man falls between the towers of the World Trade Center, perfectly vertical, almost motionless in the air. For a split second, the image makes the moment look strangely calm, almost peaceful. But that single frame hides everything that led to it, and even today, no one can say for certain who the man was. The photograph was taken on the morning of September 11, 2001. At around 9:41 a.m., smoke and fire were already pouring from the upper floors of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 45 minutes earlier, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 had struck the building, tearing into the structure between the 93rd and 99th floors. Hundreds of people were suddenly trapped above the impact zone. Elevators had failed. Stairwells were blocked or filled with smoke. Flames spread through offices as the fire intensified. Inside the upper floors, conditions were becoming impossible. People gathered near broken windows searching for air. From the streets below, witnesses began to see figures appearing at the openings of the tower. Some of them would fall from the building. At street level, Associated Press photographer Richard Drew was documenting the unfolding disaster. He had been nearby covering a fashion event when the first plane struck, and like many journalists in Lower Manhattan, he moved toward the towers. Looking upward through his camera, Drew began photographing the people falling from the building. In a rapid sequence of shots, he captured one man descending past the steel lines of the tower. Most of the images show the body tumbling through the air. But in one frame, the man appears perfectly upright, aligned with the vertical columns of the building behind him. That image became known as the Falling Man. The picture was published the following day, on September 12, 2001, in several newspapers around the world. The reaction was immediate. Many readers felt the image was too painful to see. Editors quickly faced a difficult question. Should a photograph showing a person in the final moments of life be part of the public record? Within days, most newspapers stopped printing it. Yet the question surrounding the image never disappeared. Who is the man in the photograph? Several attempts were made to identify him. One early theory suggested he might have been Norberto Hernandez, a pastry chef who worked at the windows on the World Restaurant near the top of the tower. But his family later rejected that possibility. Another name often mentioned was Jonathan Briley, a 43-year-old sound engineer who also worked at the restaurant on the 106th floor. Some observers believed the clothing and build of the man resembled him, but no definitive confirmation was ever made. The identity of the falling figure remains unknown. The photograph captured less than a second of a tragedy that lasted hours, and even decades later, that single moment still raises questions. And not every famous photograph captures tragedy alone. Some images change history the instant the shutter closes. One of the most famous photographs of the Vietnam War shows a terrified child running down a road. For decades, the image has symbolized the horror of the conflict, but the photograph reveals only a fraction of what happened that day. It was taken on June 8, 1972, near the village of Trang Bang in South Vietnam. Earlier that morning, fighting had erupted in the area as South Vietnamese forces clashed with North Vietnamese troops moving along Highway 1. Civilians had taken shelter inside a nearby Chow Dai temple, hoping the thick walls would protect them from the battle outside. But the fighting moved closer. South Vietnamese forces requested air support, and soon aircraft appeared overhead. Napalm bombs were dropped on what pilots believed were enemy positions near the village. The explosion sent fire rolling across the road and surrounding fields. At that moment, a group of children ran from the temple and onto the highway, trying to escape the flames. Among them was 9-year-old Phan Thi Kim Phuc. The napalm had burned away her clothing and severely injured her back and arms. In the photograph, she runs toward the camera with her arms stretched wide, screaming in pain as smoke rises behind her. Several other children run beside her, while South Vietnamese soldiers follow farther down the road. Just outside the frame stood a group of journalists documenting the battle. One of them was Associated Press photographer Huyen Cong Nic Ut. He captured several images as the children ran toward him, but the moment the photographs were taken, he stopped shooting. Kim Phuc was crying that the fire was too hot. Ut poured water over the burns and wrapped the injured children in blankets before placing them in his van. Then he drove them to a hospital in Saigon. Doctors initially believed the girl might not survive. Her burns covered much of her body, and for a time she remained between life and death. But she did survive. Over the years that followed, Kim Phuc endured numerous surgeries and a long recovery. Decades later, she would move to Canada and become a peace activist, speaking around the world about the war that had nearly killed her. The photograph spread rapidly across newspapers and television screens around the world. It soon became one of the most recognizable images of the Vietnam War, a single frame that seemed to reveal the human cost of the conflict. Yet even this famous image carries its own unanswered question. For decades, the photograph has been credited to Associated Press photographer Nic Ut, who later received the Pulitzer Prize for the picture. But recent investigations have raised new doubts about who actually captured the moment. Some researchers now suggest the image may have been taken by another Vietnamese photographer working at the scene. The Associated Press continues to credit Ut, but the debate has reopened a question few people ever asked before. Even the origins of one of the most famous images of the war may not be entirely certain, and the next image captured the exact moment a disaster unfolded. A massive airship burns in the sky as its metal frame collapses toward the ground. The disaster unfolds in front of cameras and journalists waiting below. But the photograph captures only the instant the catastrophe became visible. It was May 6, 1937 at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. The German passenger airship LZ-129 Hindenburg had just completed a transatlantic flight from Frankfurt and was preparing to land. Hundreds of spectators and journalists had gathered to watch the arrival of the giant aircraft, which many believed represented the future of long-distance travel. Moments earlier, the landing appeared routine. Ground crews waited for the docking lines as the enormous craft maneuvered slowly above the field. Then flames suddenly appeared near the rear. Within seconds, the fire raced across the hydrogen-filled structure. The gigantic frame collapsed as burning debris fell toward the ground. The entire disaster unfolded in less than a minute. Among the photographers present was photojournalist Sam Shear, who had been waiting to photograph the landing. When the fire erupted, he instinctively raised his camera and began shooting. One of the images he captured, the burning vessel collapsing against the sky, would become one of the most recognizable photographs of the 20th century. A reporter named Herbert Morrison was also at the scene, recording a radio report about the landing. As the craft burned above the field, his shocked voice captured the moment in a phrase that would later echo around the world. "Oh, the humanity." Although many people remember the broadcast as live, the recording was actually aired the following day. When the flames finally died out, the wreckage of the Hindenburg lay twisted across the landing field. Despite the scale of the catastrophe, many passengers and crew managed to escape. Of the 97 people aboard, 62 survived. But the impact was immediate. The destruction of the Hindenburg shattered public confidence in passenger airships, bringing an abrupt end to what many had once believed would be the future of air travel. Even today, however, one question remains unresolved. Investigators examined many possible causes of the fire, including hydrogen leaks, static electricity, and flammable materials on the outer covering. But no single explanation was ever proven with complete certainty. The photograph captures the moment the Hindenburg disaster became visible to the world, yet the exact cause of the fire may never be fully known. But the next photograph would capture something very different. Not a catastrophe in the sky, but a single face that the world would never forget. One of the most recognizable portraits in modern history shows a young refugee girl staring directly into the camera. Her green eyes are intense, almost piercing, framed by a worn red headscarf. For decades, the image has come to symbolize the human cost of war, but it reveals only a small part of the story behind it. It was taken in 1984 during the Soviet-Afghan War, when millions of Afghans were fleeing the conflict and crossing the border into Pakistan. Many of them ended up in sprawling refugee camps near the city of Peshawar, where families lived in crowded tents after losing their homes and villages. One of those camps was Nasirabad. That day, photojournalist Steve McCurry was visiting the camp while documenting the refugee crisis for National Geographic. While walking through the settlement, he entered a makeshift school tent where refugee children were studying. Among the students, he noticed a young girl sitting quietly. Her gaze immediately stood out. McCurry asked the teacher if he could photograph her. The portrait was taken in just a few moments. The girl looked directly into the camera, her expression serious and unguarded, as the dim light inside the tent fell across her face. No one recorded her name. When the image appeared on the cover of National Geographic in June 1985, it quickly became one of the most famous magazine covers ever published. The picture spread across the world and came to represent the millions of refugees displaced by the war in Afghanistan. Yet even as the image became globally known, the identity of the girl remained a mystery. For 17 years, people everywhere recognized her face, but no one knew who she was or what had happened to her. In 2002, a team from National Geographic returned to the region to search for her. After a long investigation across refugee communities, they finally located the woman behind the image. Her name was Sharbat Gula. By then, she had spent much of her life moving between Afghanistan and Pakistan as conflict continued to shape the region. The portrait had turned her face into a symbol recognized around the world. But the life behind that image had remained almost entirely unknown. Even today, the portrait raises a quiet question. How many lives shaped by war pass briefly before the camera, remembered only through a single image while the rest of their story disappears? And the next image would reveal something far beyond the life of a single person, a moment when humanity first saw its entire world from space. One of the most famous photographs ever taken shows a small blue world rising above the grey horizon of the moon. A bright sphere of oceans and clouds hangs in the darkness of space, fragile against the vast black sky. Today, the image feels familiar. But when it was first captured, no human being had ever seen the Earth this way before. The image was taken during Apollo 8, the first mission to carry astronauts beyond Earth's orbit and into lunar orbit. Launched on December 21, 1968, the spacecraft carried 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, on a historic journey around the moon. The mission marked a turning point in the space race. No people had ever traveled so far from Earth. After 3 days in space, Apollo 8 reached the Moon and began circling it, becoming the first crewed spacecraft to orbit another world. For hours, the astronauts studied the surface below them. Through the spacecraft windows, the Moon appeared stark and lifeless. Endless plains of grey dust stretched across the horizon, broken only by the rims of ancient craters formed billions of years earlier. The crew photographed the lunar landscape and described what they saw to mission control. Then, during one of the spacecraft's orbits, something unexpected appeared. As Apollo 8 rotated above the Moon's surface, a bright blue sphere suddenly rose above the lunar horizon. Earth. The astronauts had not expected to see it. Surprised by the sight, William Anders quickly reached for a camera. Using a Hasselblad camera loaded with 70mm film, he began taking photographs through the spacecraft window. One of those images captured the moment perfectly, the blue Earth rising above the silent grey surface of the Moon. The image would later become known as Earthrise. When the image was released, it quickly spread across newspapers and magazines around the world. For the first time in history, humanity could see its entire planet from the distance of another world. Many people later said the image changed how they thought about Earth. From space, the planet no longer seemed vast and limitless. Instead, it appeared small, delicate, and alone in the darkness. The image soon became one of the most widely reproduced photographs in history, and is often credited with helping inspire a new awareness of the planet's fragility. Yet the image also raised a quiet question. For centuries, people had imagined what the Earth might look like from space. But when astronauts finally saw it with their own eyes, the view revealed something unexpected. Not the center of everything, just a small, fragile world floating in the dark. Some photographs capture history. Others capture a single moment that continues to raise questions long after it was taken. A man standing alone in front of tanks. A figure falling through the sky as the world watched. A child running from fire. A disaster unfolding in front of cameras. A refugee girl whose name the world did not know for years. And a fragile planet rising above the silent surface of the Moon. Each image freezes a moment that people still try to understand. Because sometimes a single photograph reveals more about history and about ourselves than thousands of pages ever could.